Hello, lovelies. This is Lazy Fox Creates, a podcast about the crafting experience. I'm your host, Laura, and I'm not alone today. Hi.
Hi.
Would you like to introduce yourself?
I am Linette of Anacronalia. I am a bookbinder and, amongst other things, also a writer of RPG supplements and other book-related stationery and objects.
This is very exciting for me specifically because I'm very novice at bookbinding. So to have an expert here, I'm like, yes, feed me your wisdom. So how did you get into this?
So I have always been into books ever since I was little, and one of the stories I tell is that there is a photograph of me from a trip that we took to a chained medieval library, one of a few that still survives in the UK. And I am wearing the most 80s jacket you can imagine. It's neon in colour, and I'm leaning over. I'm about 7 maybe, and just like leaning over and looking at this medieval book and thinking it's the most amazing thing I've ever seen. And if I'd known then that I was going to go into bookbinding, I would have been so excited. But it was many, 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 many years later. But I got into it because I wanted to make myself a girdle book, which is a specific type of medieval binding. It has an extended cover that is designed so you can tuck it into your belt and carry it around and read it on the go. So it's becoming a little bit more well known now because there's now a book on girdle books that's been printed. But at the time it was very much a niche book type, and so very hard to learn. And so I went into first modern bookbinding and then into medieval bookbinding to try and make my own version.
What is the cover made out of then, if you're like tucking it into your belt?
So there's different versions. Most of them are made of leather, and then they have they call it a Turk's head knot that's sort of knotted round one end of the leather that tucks into your belt, or they could be made out of fabric, so either embroidered or some sort of velvet or something like that, and then that would often end in like a ring, and then that would be tucked in, or it might just be held. So sometimes if it didn't have a knot, it would just have a loose section, and so in paintings you sometimes see them just being held by this extra long bit of leather that's coming off of the top.
That's awesome. What was yours like?
Well, I now have 2 of them. The first one I made out of I think it was a skirt or a jacket that I found in a charity shop because I was trying to get cheap leather. And it's got an overlapping front with a little wooden button with like oak leaves on it. Very small. And then finishes in just a very simple knot at the top because I, at the time, didn't know about the Turk's head knot. And that had all of my folk songs in it, so I could remember the lyrics when I was singing at different events that I went to. And then my second one is made of, so it has a wooden cover and then is covered with red leather that extends upwards, has a brass clasp to finish, so much more historically accurate version, and then it has the full Turk's head knot on the top, so sort of a very kind of like almost like a tennis ball, not quite as big as a tennis ball, I guess more like I'm trying to think of something smaller, squash ball, golf ball kind of sized sort of round lump at the top, but in a sort of dark red leather instead, so it's much fancier looking as well. And so that's one that I use for my historical demonstrations when I'm talking about book history, so I have a number of models that I use for that.
I did a cosplay where I had a journal with me, and I think I found that in like what I was trying to figure out what to make for it because I don't want to be holding around this journal the whole time.
Mm.
And I didn't end up making it because it looked really hard.
Yeah, yeah, I can see that. So it is. There are simpler versions. There's actually a type of book called an almanac or a vademecum, if you're using a Latin term,
Hmm.
which is a sort of a simpler version of a girdle book. So it still has the same thing where it hangs off of your belt, but instead of being like a fully bound book with clasps and everything, it's almost like just two covers with folded pages. They're kind of folded down, so they start out at say letter size or A4 size, and then they get folded down into a sixth of that size, and that's what the book is. You kind of hold that. It's a bit more like a map.
Okay. That's nice.
So yeah, yeah, and they're a lot simpler to make. A good starting point for portable books.
Hmm. Hmm.
And then otherwise just miniature ones. You can hang them on necklaces and things as well.
Oh my god, that
So
is
yeah.
such a good idea.
My other obsession is miniatures. So I do book jewelry. So it's tiny books that you can wear as like earrings, necklaces, brooches. I did used to do cufflinks, but it's so hard to get the fittings attached to the books.
Uh,
Um, so I don't do those as often as I used to.
now that you mention it, yeah, I think I remember seeing those on your site, right?
Yeah. Yeah, they're one of
Okay,
my most popular items.
cool. So if anyone wants one of those, go go look in the episode description for the link.
Yeah, so well, at the moment I have a lot of half finished ones.
Okay.
But you can always find them at the Bronze Age Parsonage Museum because they currently stock them, which is quite nice.
Yeah, that's
That's
cool.
that's another thing that I really enjoy is being able to create the things that I would have liked to have bought from the museum shop when I was a child. Um, so I now make those. So that's an exciting thing.
I kind of relate to that in that when I was a child, I always wanted to wear Halloween costumes and like make them and dress up. And now that I'm adult, I can cosplay,
Yeah,
which is
that's
essentially what I wanted.
yeah. That's how I got into live action role playing as well. Was I wanted to wear cool costumes that I couldn't wear every day, and I was just like, I can now do that. I can just make a thing and wear it.
Yeah, so do you want to get into that?
So I was living in Sweden at the time, and had just got into RPGs, tabletop role playing, and yeah, had friends who had heard about LARPing and thought that sounded like fun. It was an extension of what we were already doing, but you get to wear cool costumes.
Hmm.
And unfortunately, I never managed to make it to an organised one while I was still living in Sweden. By that point, I had made myself my first full costume. Me and my friends had got together and had a little camping trip in character, just the four of us. And so we, had all of the bits of it, but hadn't actually gone to an organised game. And then at university, funnily enough, so there was you have all the societies that you can join, sort of extracurricular stuff, and they had both a tabletop society and a LARP society, and I walked up on the first day of the fair and just said, "Here's my money, please can I join?" And they were all, which was hilarious because they were halfway through the spiel of trying to explain what LARPing was, and I was like, "I already know." And so I did that for a bit, and then during an interview for my master's degree in medieval studies, the person I was there interviewing with, she was also going to become a fellow student, caught that I'd mentioned that I did LARPing, was interested in LARPing, and she invited me along to my first big fest LARP. And And that was basically the start of my continued LARP career, I guess.
I'm very jealous. I also want to be LARPing,
It's
but
fun.
I don't know how.
I mean, I don't know what the scene is like where you are, but certainly, yeah, I've done such a varied amount of games, everything from science fiction to alternate history versions of historical events to fantasy based stuff to straight living history style ish, kind of what they call some of the Nordic LARP stuff as well, or the slightly more out there ideas, up to and including being birds symbolizing emotions in a dreamscape. It's such a difficult one to explain. It was great
What
fun.
what kind of costume do you make for that?
I was in an approximation of there's a painting of, I think it's Lady Macbeth. She's got a green gown that has beetle wings all over it and these two big plaits, and she's got a crown that she's just lowering onto her head. It's a very well-known painting, and I love it. And I'm a fan of green anyway, so I basically based my outfit on that.
Nice.
Because I figured it was just a personification of something, could be anything what you want. And we all had different like themes, so mine was sort of more Celtic based, and others were doing more sort of Egyptian mythology, and some people were doing other stuff. So it was a big mashup of different types of imagery. But yeah, I remember basing mine very clearly on that one painting, mainly so I could have an excuse to wear it. It's such a beautiful garment.
You mentioned that you would teach some bookbinding too. What's
Yes, I
that
do.
like?
I love teaching. I it's really funny. There are so many bookbinders in the UK and just generally that I always expect when I'm traveling to other places that they have teachers already set up, because you already have bookbinders in your area. Are they not teaching? And they do, but not as often, because I hadn't realised that there are quite how often people do not enjoy teaching. But I love it. It's great fun. I learn a lot from teaching, which is I think the thing that I get, because my maths teacher used to say, you've only really understood something properly when you can teach it to somebody else, which I think is unfair, because there's also like communication is a thing. But for me, I think it's more you understand it differently when you've had to
Yeah.
explain it to someone else. So there's details and things that I don't pick up that I do until I start explaining to someone else why I'm doing them. And then I'm like, oh yes, no, there is a thing, there's a whole step that I've forgotten to explain, because to me it's obvious. But having to explain it to someone else who's coming to it new, it's like, oh. And then the questions you get asked as well are just brilliant. Like ideas that, again, I just wouldn't have thought of if it was just me working on my own in the studio. But I also really like just watching people get really excited about making something and learning something new. And like secretly, I want to have created an army of bookbinders who just go out and repair books for people and make things and
Just like walking down the street handing people books.
yeah. I helped with that. That was
I made this.
like I have there's one person who came to my studio and we did a very simple case binding for an art project, and she's now taken that art project to several museums and libraries, and like it was all her idea. She just came to me for the practical making the actual binding part of it, and then has built on that herself afterwards. But it's just fantastic to feel like I've been part of this major project that's been going around, and Yeah, it's lovely. I love it. It's very rewarding, I think.
I make watches for my job. Mostly I fix watches, but I train people sometimes too. And I totally relate to how you're like, they ask such interesting questions because sometimes I'm just like, I would never ever have. Just the other day, I was training someone and they asked me like the function of a specific part, and I just like stopped and I'm like, oh, I guess I've never thought of that in 8 years of doing this job.
Yeah, yeah. It's like how many times have I explained why the hinge is a certain distance from the spine of a
Mm.
book and then had to go, I don't know why we suddenly decided to make them that way because they weren't that way originally. Like if you look at a medieval book, it doesn't have a gap between the spine and the hinge. It's a very different method of making. And then for some reason, we invented this whole new way of doing it. And it's now we have to learn a completely new method. And as one of the fun things I find is because I introduce a lot of book history into my classes, I always have to warn my students that I will tell them probably more information about bookbinding than they need to know in order to make a book. But it's fun context, or at least I
I
hope
would
it's
love
fun.
that.
It's like they seem to be enjoying it, so not had any complaints so far. But yeah, one of the things I really like is how there's all these features in modern books that only exist because they were functional features in a medieval book. So now we've just
Oh.
got like the decorative elements are still there, but they don't do anything. So you're like, well, we're still adding them, but at no point has someone stopped and gone, but why have we not just stopped adding it since it's not doing anything?
Like
We
what
could
kinds
just
of
do something
things?
different. Was the headbands is the obvious one.
Oh, okay.
So there are hundreds of different styles of hand sewn headbands, but your early headbands were all very much functional. They're adding structural strength to the book, so that to the top and the bottom, which is where most of the strain of flexing your book open and shut is going to be. And so your original headbands were sewn more or less into every single section, every single gathering of your
Oh.
book, so holding it together. And then when they're starting to speed up the process because they want to make the books cheaper, they want to make them faster. There's all sorts of other things that happens that makes that cheaper and easier. But one of them is the headband. They start anchoring it at the beginning and then somewhere in the middle and then somewhere at the end, but only like 3 points. And so there's a period of hand sewn headbands, sort of around the 18th century, that just start falling off because they're attached by these 3 points. And it's also around that time where they're like, well, maybe we don't have to hand sew them. Maybe we can create them using a bit of fabric. And so you get this, what is more the modern headband, which is a bit of piping, basically, that gets stuck to the back of the spine, sticks up, visually looks like a headband, but doesn't do anything. Like there's a little bit of extra glue, but it's not actually adding any strength. It's just decorative. And it's only there because a good book has a headband. And in the same way as like if you asked somebody to describe what a fancy good book is, and LARPers do this a lot, if they're thinking of a book, they're thinking, well, it has to be leather, it has to have brass clasps, it has to have brass corners and bosses on. And you think, well, why does it have to have those items? Well, that's a medieval book. It's because it's a medieval book. So all of those were functional. So the corners are there because that's where you get all the damage. So you've got these brass corners were on there. The bosses were to stop the leather getting scuffed when your book was stored flat rather than upright.
Oh, okay.
So it lifts it off the shelf. So when you're moving it on the shelf, obviously once it's upright and you've got other books next to it, it's then damaging the covers of the other books. So then you remove the bosses and books become flat. So it's all different sort of functionality. How you're using the book changes what you're doing with it. The clasps are there because parchment doesn't like to stay flat because it's an animal product. So it will expand. So if you want your book to stay shut, you have to have a clasp on it. when they go over to paper, they keep having clasps on it for a little while until they realise that they don't have to have clasps on it because paper doesn't expand in the same way. So then they go over to things like ties and ribbons, and then they realise that ties and ribbons are really impractical because they'll either break off or you have to constantly untie them and tie them to use your book. So then they just get rid of them altogether. So then they just keep the clasps for super fancy books like Bibles or big things that they want to make look fancier and more like a proper book. So yeah, that's the kind of thing that I would basically drone on about in class.
I was just thinking, I feel like I'm in your class and it's making me really happy, and I like wish that I could go to your class. That's so interesting because I have done a headband with piping and I didn't know why. Other than it was in
Yeah.
I was like, it looks nice. I don't really know how this is adding to like the structure of the book, but it does make it look nice.
Yeah, and the answer is it doesn't. I'm sure, I can't remember who it was. I was in a class with someone who was also a conservator, and I'm sure they said, I don't even know why we bother with headbands. Like, what's the point? But it's a historical artifact. It's just left over from when we used to do them by hand. And I say used to, it's not linear. We do still sew headbands by hand. If you're making like a fine binding or you're doing something where you need more strength in the structure, you'll still do a hand sewn headband. It's worth doing. So it's still a good thing to learn. And like a lot of religious texts, especially in say like the Sikh tradition, they will have specific ways of binding their texts, which, you know, they're still using the traditional methods. And I think it's in Ethiopia, they're still binding church Bibles in the same way as they did in the Middle Ages, like full-on scriptorium and everything.
It's impressive.
Amazing. Yeah, this is living history rather than like. It's a shame because like I have to relearn a lot of this. I have to find, stare at artifacts and try and work it out, or speak to other binders who have done the same. And then in other places, it's a tradition that's just kept going. It's fascinating.
You are in the UK, right?
I am in the UK, yes. Yeah.
I think I remember when you mentioned there being like a lot of bookbinders. Is that like UK specific? I feel like I looked that up and something said that.
So currently on the Heritage Crafts list, we are considered least concern. It's a bit like the red list for crafts that has been created for the UK by the Heritage Crafts Association. It's called the Radcliffe Red List, and it lists all of these different crafts, and it basically says these are the ones that are risk that we need to try and help keep them alive, and then so on and so on. So bookbinding is thankfully relatively low concern because at the moment we have enough students, we have enough teachers. I would say we probably don't have enough formal classes. There's no apprenticeship anymore. There's a couple of places that have opened up more formal schooling in bookbindings, but in London. So if you're in London, great. If you're in the north, not so good. But, you know, there's lots of places where you can learn in a sort of more non-traditional route, which is how I did it. But it's currently doing fine. But there are lots of related crafts that are considered at risk because they've got maybe 2 or 3, sometimes only 1 practitioner. So, for example, parchment making or four-edge painting. So I think four-edge painters, I can count 3 off the top of my head who are doing it professionally, and there's probably more who are doing it just for themselves. And then parchment making, we have, as far as I'm aware, 1, maybe 2, because I think might have an apprentice now, but I know when the first time they printed the list, there was only one parchment maker in the UK. I mean, in the world, globally, there's probably way more, but yeah, looking at the UK specifically. So there are definitely, when I started bookbinding, about 13 years ago now, a lot of the places that were teaching bookbinding, even places that I did bookbinding courses, they don't exist anymore. So they were shutting down around the time I went to an open day for a book conservation course, and it turned out that was the last year they were running it, which I didn't know at the time I went. But yeah, so both my first course in bookbinding and my second course in bookbinding, I did them and then they shut down. So they ran out of funding.
Oh.
So it was just, yeah. And then we've been very lucky in the last couple of years that the trend is going in the other direction now, partly fueled by things like BookTok and Instagram, and that people are getting really into the idea of being able to rebind their books into something more fancy, more appropriate for their stuff. So I get quite a few students now who come and their introduction to bookbinding is a YouTube video or a little reel or something where they've picked up a specific style of binding that they want to then build on. So that's quite positive, I would say.
Yeah. That's so interesting. I have definitely seen stuff on TikTok and said I needed to go do that immediately. So
Early days I did a lot of staring at pictures of binders and conservators on Instagram, like photos, because it was before they'd introduced videos. So I was just like looking at the close-ups, trying to work it out from the close-ups. So it's a good place to start.
my leatherworking I have learned almost exclusively off of YouTube because I haven't been able to find any kind of class around me that I have time/money for. So
Yeah, getting into crafts is expensive, especially the heritage ones, because you often need quite specialist tools and whatnot. So when I'm teaching, I try to, for the sort of beginners level stuff, I always try and come up with a method that will work with the bare minimum of tools, so things you could find around your house. I think the most specialist thing is a bone folder. And then,
which are super cheap, so
yeah, and relatively easy to get hold of on various online marketplaces. So yeah, it's gives people a chance to decide what type of bookbinding they want to do before they get into buying the equipment, because there's quite a lot of the modern styles you don't need as much of the heavy equipment. It's only if you're going into more traditional stuff, of some fine bindings, that you might need like big wooden laying presses and finishing presses and nipping presses and stuff like that. Whereas for a lot of stuff, you can get away with things that you have lying around the house. So, you've got some scissors and a sewing needle, you can manage most things.
what are some of the different kinds of bindings that you teach or that you like?
Oh gosh, there's so many though. So because my interest is mainly in history and specifically in European centric bindings, although I love some of the Islamic bindings, are so beautiful. I mainly focus on sort of wooden boarded. So it gets very technical because they all have different names depending on who's classifying them. But yeah, so they're wooden boarded books that are bound on sewing supports. So either cord bound or with Allentor leather.
Oh, I think that's what I did. I have no idea what I did is called because I watched it on YouTube. Is it like in a frame and you
So you use a sewing frame.
Yes. Okay, sorry.
So
Didn't mean to interrupt. I just got really excited.
That is the kind of thing that's what I mean. That's why I love that sort of passion when people get excited about stuff. So absolutely interrupt. No, it was so that's my favourite. I love sewing on on supported sewing, and I like raised bands on my books. I have done some more modern kind of sort of smooth backed where the sewing supports are recessed into the book, so you get like a
Okay.
smooth spine. But I really like the way they look when they've got the
Mm-hmm.
raised bands. So I tend towards those. When I'm teaching, because often people are wanting just like a half day or a single day, I tend to do sort of more pamphlet based sewings, so like a single section. So I do this little pocket book that has a little trifold cover that you can sort of sneak into your pocket, and you can reuse the cover as well because you're just sewing straight into the cover rather than gluing things in. And then sort of historic version of that I tend to do is a version of the Nag Hammadi bindings, which is a 3rd century binding that was found in Nag Hammadi in Egypt. So they're leather bound. The originals were in papyrus, but we tend to use paper. So I do a sort of modern version of that that I teach. I do also do a historically accurate one, but I teach that less often because that's more of a niche than the
Mm-hmm.
other one, whereas lots of people really like the tactile stuff. But that one's got all of these leather ties that you have to wrap round it and tie it to keep it shut, and it looks very pleasingly historic while also looking quite modern, depending on what colours of leather and style you've gone for in terms of paper lining and so on. And then I teach a lot of case bindings because that's your standard basic modern book. And certainly, if people are then wanting to go into repairing their own books, that's a good place to start because a lot of the books that are in people's collections, unless you're an antiquarian, tends to be case bindings. And then I've this year, for the first time, I'll be teaching a long form course of the medieval binding. So we're going to be starting our one day doing sewing the book, then the headbands, then making the wooden boards and shaping them and chiseling them out, and then covering, and then finally making a clasp to go on it so they can actually make the brass clasp from scratch. So it's going to be an in-depth class. I don't know how it's going to go yet because it's the first time, but I'm very excited.
You make the clasp?
Yes, yeah, out of brass.
That's so
It's a
cool.
fairly simple. It's the style I'm going to be teaching is relatively simple in terms it's like a rolled piece of brass and then you make a hook to go over the top of it. So it's one of the easier ones to do in terms of metalworking. So you're not having to do in-depth jewellery making to learn it. And then I often do just a ring and a peg, which is basically a little brass nail, and then not so much a jump ring, but it's more or less a jump ring for the other end, which is also historically accurate. So it's like you can go fancy and you can go not fancy. I'm very lucky to be in a co-working space with a lot of other creatives, and one of my goals with a friend of mine called Amy Stringer, who's a jewellery maker and ceramicist, is we are going to get together and make some book furniture. So I'm actually going to be doing some proper 3D clasps rather than just the simple versions. So that's my personal continued goal to get even fancier, basically.
I love that this is a thing where you can just like keep learning things indefinitely.
Oh yeah, I think I could be learning stuff right up until the day I die, and I still would have more to learn when it comes to books because there's so many of them, and especially once you go global, there's lots and lots of different types of codex, and yeah, there's one of the reasons I never get bored, really. Because if I get bored of making a particular type of book, I just make a different type of book.
Mm-hmm.
It's,
It's awesome. Okay. That covers mostly all the questions I had thought of just through conversation. It covered. But there is one thing. This is a super niche thing, and this is my personal question that I don't know if anyone will actually be interested in. Now, in the book Inkheart.
one of my favorite books.
Oh, okay, good, good, good.
Yeah.
Okay, so they say that you can't use regular glue for the spine. You have to use paste. And I've always been curious of why that is. Do you know why that is?
Oh, so yeah. Um, so there are lots of different glues that you can use for the spine of a book, depending
Okay.
on the style of book. So
Okay.
paste it dries slowly and it's relatively flexible. It's not as flexible as PVA, but it is flexible. So it works very well for um, both leather books and for medieval books and a lot of modern books. It dries very slowly. So if you're working with leather and you're pasting it out, it's really, really good for being able to get everything in position nicely before it sticks. Whereas PVA is very quick, so you stick it down and it would be stuck almost immediately. I use PVA as well as pastes, depending on what I'm working on. I mainly use paste when I'm repairing books because it's got less chemicals in it in terms of like acidity and whatnot, so it's less likely to damage the book, and also it's reversible, so it's easier to undo what you've done. So I wouldn't say, I think when he says you could only use paste, he's being a little bit prescriptive, in my personal opinion. But it's certainly the most traditional use. I would say, like,
This-
is the one that's been used the longest is paste. And a lot of books are made using that.
I feel like a great mystery in my life has been solved.
Yeah. Well, it's better than using fish glue, which is, or
Oh,
any of
no
the animal
doubt.
glues, because there is, yeah. Um, I inherited a bunch of this the animal glues, and I've never used them because the style of bindings that I do is just not appropriate at all because it sets solid. So they're good for like
Okay.
some of the Victorian styles of binding where you want a nice solid spine that doesn't change shape. They tend to lock those in with a solid
Okay.
glue, but I'm not a fan. I like my books to move a bit more than that.
I'm just trying to imagine that kind of book with the spine not moving.
Yeah, so they tend to be rounded and backed. So
Oh, okay.
so rounding, you're just making the spine sort of a gentle curve. With a rounded and backed book, you're creating more of like a mushroom shape, where the sort of underside of the mushroom is where your boards would then sit in that sort of recess that you created. So that style of spine can sometimes be more rigid or allows for being more rigid. I'm being careful with my words because there are books that are made in that period that are made far too tight. Very difficult to open, so it's clearly not the best way of binding them. But it is a choice, basically. That if you, there are some styles where people want it to be that solid, but I think for most things, I would say paste or PVA or EVA, which is like a less acidic version of PVA, are the glues that I tend to go towards and recommend when people are binding. But yeah.
Well, thank you. Okay, this has been a very good conversation, and I feel like just a whole bunch of knowledge has been like dropped into my head that I'm gonna be happy editing this because I get to hear it again. Um, is there anything else that you wanted to talk about?
I think the only thing I mentioned at the beginning that I haven't mentioned is writing the tabletop games.
Oh yes, yes. Okay, because I've seen I think one of the adventures that was published, and it was about like bookbinding or something, which is fantastic.
So it was a challenge basically. It was during lockdown, and we were doing lots of different bits of research on for a historical project on a street in York in the UK, and looking at which artisans and crafters and so on lived there for a long period. And I was given all of the printers and booksellers and bookbinders and anything related to bookbinding. So so much information. We split it up, and they thought that would keep me engaged. And so myself and my partner, who I write the RPGs with, they they were helping me out with the research, and we'd been talking about adventures and bookish adventures, and I was handed an adventure and said, this is a bookish adventure, and I looked at it and went, this has a book in it, but the adventure is not bookish. This could just be any shaped object. If you swapped this for, I don't know, a goblet or a magical mace, the adventure would be the same. It's not bookish enough for me. And I said, well, maybe I could write a bookish adventure. I could probably write one in no time at all. And I wasn't being 100% serious. It was just an off-the-cuff comment. But they responded with, well, go on then. So I started writing this, and it's what became our first adventure, which was part of a supplement, which is called Incunabula. And the adventure is called The Bookbinder's Curse. I won't go too much into detail because it will spoiler it for anyone who is having their GM run it. But there are books, there are curses, and it's more to do with not just the book, but all of the industry and the people and artisans involved around it. And it's a sneaky way of teaching people about book history and putting in Easter eggs and things that I really enjoy, having done medieval studies as well as bookbinding. I can put in so many little like nuggets of information while also making it really fun for role playing. So it's not intended to be a historically accurate portrayal of the period or anything like that, or indeed an accurate portrayal of bookbinders, paper makers, printers, but using them as inspiration for creating this adventure. So we did the first one, and I was expecting it to maybe appeal to like 6 or 7 people, and I think we've sold over 150, maybe 200 copies now, not counting digital downloads.
Oh, wow.
And
I didn't even realize that you could get a physical copy of it.
yeah,
I'm
so
gonna have to do that.
I hand bind them.
Oh my
They need the
god.
bookish touch. That's the nerd I am. I made it harder for myself to sell them by hand binding them. But I have now gone to the point where I've got a printer to print the pages so that I don't have to struggle with my aging printer. But yeah, I do still hand sew them. It's just a simple pamphlet stitch, but we are talking about maybe doing a collector's edition when we finished our set, where we bind it like a hardback or something. But at the moment, it's just simple pamphlets. And we've got, let's see, so we've printed one supplement. We have 3 adventures, I think, printed. Yes, 3 adventures currently printed. 2 little encounters. which we call our chapbook encounters, that are inspired by various things, but then designed to look a bit like 16th to 18th century chapbooks, sort of the simple stuff that you'd get on the streets. And then we have 2 adventures that I'm currently in the final stages of producing at the moment. Basically snowballed. It's starting out, we just keep getting new ideas and going like, let's write an adventure about this. So yeah, so the first 2 was bookbinder and printer. We've done a printing adventure, we've done a paper making adventure, we're doing a librarian based one, and then a scribe based one. So that's the 2 that we're working on at the moment, is librarian scribes. So yeah. Lots.
Well, I was gonna ask if you have like a time frame in mind of when you would finish them, but it sounds like once you finish these, maybe there will just be more.
So the plan is for, at the very least, the librarian one to be finished by July, because I have a very big fair in July, which is like one of my major events of the year, and so I try and time all of my new products releases for that fair. So that's the plan, is to get at least that one. If I can get both of them done, fingers crossed, that would be amazing. But if not, the other one will probably be around Christmas.
I'm definitely gonna put links for those in the episode description because they sound fantastic and I want people to get them and I want to get them.
It's one of those things that I never saw myself doing it as like part of my job, and has now just become a natural part of the whole like umbrella of bookbinder related stuff that I do.
It's awesome. And these are for 5th edition?
Yes, so they
Okay.
are for 5th edition. We tend to write them in a way that relies less on mechanics. So the mechanics is there,
Okay.
but both my partner and I, we are very much more focused on like setting and flavour than we are mechanics. So don't expect it to be wonderfully balanced in any way. We've deliberately gone for what is more interesting in a narrative sense than necessarily what plays perfectly. Not least because I do not have a head for mechanics. I can come up with ideas for plot very quickly, but mechanics not so much. So I've been running 2 campaigns using the incunabula as a base, and they are very different. I've been jokingly referring to them as the Peaky Binders, which, if you know the series Peaky Blinders, gives you some idea of what that's like. So they're in an urban environment, there's lots of guild politics, underground organisations, they're running a printing house. And then the other one is Hobbiton solves book crime, because they're all playing halflings and gnomes in a rural setting and wandering around from village to village solving village problems, but again in a bookish related way. So, but using this, I started with the same adventure for both of them, so it was quite interesting how quickly they diverged.
I'm so jealous of your players. I want to be in those games.
Yeah, it's been, we've snuck in some very nerdy stuff. Like I'm very lucky in that I've got friends who have the same sort of level of nerdiness that I do. So they're doing things like so one of the things that we've covered is like Elvish grammar and the difference between like Nordic and Southern Elvish, and how stuff like, they've discovered the etymology of a place name is different from what they thought it was, and that has been part of the plot in a coherent way, and they've been really excited about it. Like they're inviting an NPC over to dinner to explain some of the grammar to them, that kind of thing. And then in another one, it was they spent a whole day searching through boxes of charters to find one legal document that had a word changed. So very, very like niche nerdiness going on. But yeah, a lot of fun.
Gosh, that is so great. I love that so much. Okay. I think that's it. I think we're good.
I'm out. I have nothing else to. No, I could easily talk all day about books, finding
uh,
stuff, but I also need to sleep. So
yeah. I likewise, I can just sit here and like listening. But yeah, where do you want to send people? Where should they look for you if they want to find you?
so my website is anachronalia.co.uk. All of my RPGs are available for download there. I don't have much stock on there at the moment because I'm in the middle of restocking, but there is some stock on there, and that's where I tend to sell. I sometimes remember to open my Etsy store, but I not so often. Yeah, and then I think that's probably the best place to go. Is my website. If you're wanting to use Drive-Through RPG, I do also do stuff in Drive-Through RPG, so that's an option.
And I'll link to all that stuff in the episode description. So go find it. All right. If you would like to find me, you can go to lazyfoxcreates.com. There's a bunch of pages to follow on there, so go crazy. Thank you so much for joining me for this episode.
No, thank you for inviting me.
It's been a great conversation. Well, I hope you have enjoyed listening to this episode as we've enjoyed making it. Love y'all, and go out and make something.